The Pima County Adult Probation Learn Lab is a GED study program open to all legal residents 18 and over. We offer classes and individualized instruction for all subjects of the GED test, as well as career and college advice. For more information, click the link below.
Greetings, Learn Lab students. In this video, we're going to take a look at a very important reading skill, and that is how to figure out words that we don't know. There are a number of tools. We're going to discuss those in a little bit, but first, a little bit of background on why this skill is so important. First thing we need to realize is that the English language is a very acquisitional language. It spends a lot of time wandering around the world, looking at other languages and going, that's a nice word. I'm going to take it now. Because of this, the English language has lots of words, and there's no way anybody is going to know the definition of every single word in the English language. And actually, I would probably say even any language, even if you are a native speaker of English, Swahili, Spanish, Russian, whatever, there's words you're going to come across in reading that you don't know. So we've got to have some tools on how to figure out those words, because it's really hard to understand what you're reading if there's gaps or holes in words that you don't know. And some people will say, well, if you see a word, go look it up in the dictionary. I have a real hard time with that strategy. My first reason is the second you put down whatever you're reading and go look up a word in a dictionary, you have left behind what you're reading. And in a sense, you are going to have to start over. The second reason is you'll find words have different meanings depending on how they're used. So you're going to have to figure out which meaning based on what you're reading in the first place. So skip the middleman and try to figure out what words are without having to leave the text that you are in. That's really going to help you a lot with your comprehension. It's going to help you with reading skills across the board, because the more you work with, deal with inside the text that you are reading, the quicker and better your understanding is going to come of what you are reading. So keep that in mind as we look through this. And some people also suggest, create your own dictionary of words that you don't know. That's not a bad idea. If you are reading something you can write on or take notes on, highlight words that you don't know, finish reading, and then you can go back and look them up. That's not a bad idea, but I would say even there, try to figure out what the meaning is before you look it up. And then use the lookup as a check on your skills on figuring out what words you don't know. So that's just a little bit of a background. So what we've got here today, I'm actually going to have two worksheets that are available for you to download. Check the link below. That'll take you to where you can get those worksheets. Or if you've got my contact information, you can contact me directly and I will send those to you. The first one we're actually going to do together. The second worksheet is going to be for you to do to practice these skills. So what we've got here is, this is words in context. This is a worksheet that's got words that I made up. Okay? Some of them have some connection to reality. Most of them don't. I did that on purpose because ultimately we are practicing how do we figure out words we don't know. So there's going to be words you don't know here because they came out of the depths of my mind. Whenever you see any sort of worksheet, this is just sort of test-taking skill. Always read the directions. And this says use the passages to figure out what the words you don't know. Figure out the words you don't know. That's what we're doing here. So as always, we just dive in with our reading, and I'll go ahead and read it first, and then we can go back and try to do some cogitating on what these words mean. Zonkenator noodled his dipthemeister to the Bonkenather. At the Bonkenather, he bought some dinfus, a dingleberry, and a zoopelang. He then got into his dipthemeister and went back home. So obviously we've got some words here that are weird. And below we've got a space here where we can look at what these words mean. Dipthemeister, Bonteganther, and noodled. So let's take a look at that first word, Diphthemeister. And again, if you try to look this up in the dictionary, I'd be interested if you did find anything because I made this word up. So first we look at this, well, we got Zonkenator. Well, right away there's something it's a weird sounding word. What is it? We can use some context to sort of figure it out. If we look at this and we see Zonkenator noodled his. All right, his is a pronoun meaning something that belongs to him, to a person. So because it's Zonkenator noodled his, that's my key that Zonkenator is a name. We could say Bill noodled his, or Joaquin noodled his. Okay, so that's a name. So right away, even though it's this weird word, it's underlined in red because Microsoft Word doesn't like it, we figured out it's a name. What exactly that name means, don't know, don't care, don't need to know. At least not at this point. We just need to understand that it's a name. So once we figure that out, we can now move a little bit further forward. Noodled his Diphthemeister to the Bonkenather. Okay, I got nothing. Still a bunch of gibberish. Let's keep reading and see if I can come up with some more. At the Bonkenather, he bought some dinfus, a dingleberry, and a zoopelang. Okay, no help. Remember, we're focusing on Diphthemeister. He then got into his Diphthemeister and went back home. Okay, that can give me a little bit of a clue right there. He noodled his Diphthemeister to the Bonkenather, Bontaganther. I should come up with easier words to say. And then he gets into the Diphthemeister again and went back home. Alright, there's some context clues. This Diphthemeister, whatever it is something that is getting Zonkenator to a location and back. Right? Okay, he noodled his Diphthemeister to the Bonkenather. Okay, he got into his Diphthemeister and went back home. All right. Hey, that sounds kind of like a car, doesn't it? He noodled his car to the Bonkenather. He got into his car and went back home. Hey, that makes sense. So you notice what I did there. I looked at context. And even though when I first hit that word, I kept going because I needed more context. All right? And that can be a trap that you fall into when you're reading. You hit a word you don't know, you stop everything and try to figure out that word. That's where reading failure happens. Because more than likely, there's going to be more clues somewhere along the line that can help you figure out that word. In this case, when I got to the third sentence, he got into his Diphthemeister and went back home. All right, he got into it and went back home. It's a transportation device. What do we use to transport ourselves around? Lots of things, but mostly we use a car. You might think bus, but he got into his. Remember, his is a word that indicates ownership. If you're riding the bus, you don't own the bus, most likely. So, all right, bus would be not a bad guess because it does take you to the Bonkenather and back home. But most people riding the bus don't own the bus. So now we're looking at car. So our Diphthemeister is a car. We've used context, we've used extra sentences, and we've put together meaning of a word. All right, let's look at the next one there. Bontaganther. And you notice with these words, I'm pronouncing them differently. Pronunciation at this point doesn't really mean anything. What's really important is I'm understanding the passage. Ultimately, that's what's super important with reading, is that you understand what it says. That's the ultimate point to reading. You can mispronounce things. That's fine. Do you understand it? That's what's important. All right, so now we're looking at the Bontaganther. Well, what does Zonkenator do at the Bonkenather? He bought, it says right there, second sentence, at the Bonkenather, he bought some dinfus, a dingleberry, and a zoopelang. Well, I don't know what the heck a dinfus, a dingleberry, and a zoopelang is, but I know there's something that you can buy because he bought them. Where do you go to buy stuff? You go to the store. Again, the context around it. Sometimes looking at the action of what he's doing. Okay? At the Bonkenanther, he bought. You go to the store to buy stuff. So here again, you can see where context gives you more meaning. You can allow you to construct that meaning. All right, so look at that last one there, noodled. And that's actually there in the first sentence. Zonkenator noodled his Diepthemeister to the Bonkenanther. Again, well, hang on. Think about the knowledge we've built. We know that a Bonkenanther is a car. Or no, excuse me. We know the Bonkenanther is the store. The Diepthemeister is a car. Zonkenator noodled his Diepthemeister to the Bonkenanther. So sometimes we can substitute in our words, right? So Zonkenator noodled his car to the store. What do you call it when you operate a car? Especially when you take your car to one point to another. Zonkenator drove his car to the store. At the store, he bought some dinfus, a dingleberry, and a zupeline. He then got into his car and went back home. We used context clues to come up with guesses, and then we checked our guesses for understanding. Now there are still some words in here that are a little bit funky. Dinfus, dingleberry, zupeline. Ultimately, ask yourself this question. Does having an actual textbook definition of these three words prevent us to understand what is happening in these three sentences? Can you summarize what Zonkenator is doing without knowing what those three words are? In this case, most likely yes. Because the ultimate point of this is, this guy went to the store, bought some stuff, and went home. That's the understanding. What exactly that stuff is, I don't know. I don't really need to know at this time. Remember, the idea here is understanding. Yeah, it's a little bit confusing. You want to know what these three items are. But ultimately, do you get the idea of what's happening here? That's what we're really after at this point. Do you understand what's happening? Alright, so Zonkenator went to the store, drove his car, bought some stuff, went back home. Let's see what else good old Zonkenator is going to be doing with his day. After his trip to the Bonkenanther, Zonkenator picked up his two growths, Ziptong and Zingstep, and took them to Inductoplanter. At Inductoplanter, his growths, learned about maths and Glubberflauber. All right. We got to figure out what Inductoplanter is, what are growths, and then we want to know what is the relationship between Ziptong and Zingstep. So we go back to the passage here. We've got a couple of sentences. We already know what a Bonkenanther is, right? Because we figured that out previously. Knowledge builds on itself. So after his trip to the store, Zonkenator picked up his two growths, Ziptong and Zingstep, and took them to Inductoplanter. At Inductoplanter, his growths learned about maths and Glubberflauber. Alright. Growths, we can come up with something that's kind of close. If you think about it, growth is something that grows. Zonkenator is picking up his two growths, Ziptong and Zingstep, and then he takes them somewhere. Reasonable guess, his growths are his children. So that's my reasonable guess for growth. So let's take a look a little bit deeper into this. At Inductoplanter, let's try to figure out what Inductoplanter is. His growths learned about maths and Glubberflauber. All right, maths. Hey, I know maths. That's weird to have an S at the end of it, but math. Where do you learn about math? School. At Inductoplanter, his growths learned about maths and Gluber-Flopper. Where do you learn about math? You learn about math generally at school. Helps if I learn how to spell. There we go. So Inductoplanter is school. His growths are children, maths, and Gluber-Flopper. Don't know what Gluber-Flopper is? We can make an educated guess that it's probably some sort of subject, right? You go to school, you learn about math, you learn about English, you learn about history, all sorts of different things. What is the relationship between Ziptong and Zingstep? In other words, how are these two beings connected? And how do we know these are names? Well, names are always capitalized. So if I see a capitalized word in the middle of a sentence, it's a proper name, which means it is something very specific. We know Zonconator is some sort of live being. These are his two growths, Ziptong and Zingstep. So what is their relationship? They are related to Zonconator. They belong to him. They are his. They are both his siblings. Brother, sister, brother, brother, daughter, daughter, whatever. But they are siblings. Okay? And how can we sort of confirm that guess? Well, he's sending them to school. That's sort of a way of saying Zonconator is an adult, because generally the adults pick up the kids from school. Okay, so Ziptong and Zingstep are siblings. And they are of age to be going to school, but they're still children. Some of the knowledge we had to bring with us from the previous passage, right? We kind of had to have an idea of who Zonconator was. We had to bring in some of our own background knowledge of where do you learn things? Well, I learned things at school. So there's lots of different areas that you are pulling these clues from. All right, so he went to the store, he picked up some stuff, he went home, then he went and picked up his kids. End of the day. Let's continue on with Zonconator and what he's doing here. At the end of the lie tag, Zonconator asked his growths about what they did at Inductoplanter. Zingstep talked about adding plinktots in maths, and Ziptong bragged about scoring a plots while playing Calvin ball in Gluber-Flopper. Say that 3 times fast. All right. So we want to figure out lie tag, plinktots, plots, and Gluber-Flopper. If you believe we had Gluber-Flopper, yes we did. We had Gluber-Flopper before and we didn't really have any clue what Gluber-Flopper was. We kept reading to get more clues. So at the end of the lie tag, Zonconator asked his growths about what they did at Inductoplanter. Remember, what is Inductoplanter? School. All right? What do most parents do at the dinner table with their children? Okay? Sometimes the parents say, so what did you do in school today? Remember, Inductoplanter is school. Zonconator asked his growths about what they did at Inductoplanter. And he did this at the end of the lie tag. Maybe noodle on that one a little bit more. Zingstep talked about adding plinktots in maths. Okay. Words, vocabulary around the word plinktot. They're adding plinktots In maths class, blank dots are numbers. Right? Because we add numbers in math class. Okay. Use some of the vocabulary around it. Zipton bragged about scoring a Platz while playing Calvin ball in Glubberflobber. Scoring a Platz. Scoring a Platz. We call scoring it, we score maybe a point or a goal or something along those lines. So Platz would be a point, maybe goal. Okay, so here again, we're not getting definite definitions, but we're getting close so that we can understand it. All right, while playing Calvin ball in Glubberflobber. Okay, Glubberflobber. Well, think about in Glubberflobber, he is playing Calvin ball. Playing, we usually play a game. So he's playing some sort of game, Calvin ball. He is playing Calvin ball in Glubberflobber. Remember, he is at Untitled, which is school. What do you do? Where do you play a game at school? A couple of options. It could be PE, right? It could be during lunch, recess, or something else like that. But we get, again, we're understanding. Let's go back and take a look here again at lie tag. At the end of the lie tag, Zonkinator asks his girls, again, think about your background knowledge, your own personal background that you have. When do we generally discuss what we did during our awakening moments? Trying to not give the word away here. We do it at the end of the day. You're generating meaning of the words to help it make sense. And you're using the text to check that your meaning really does make sense. You can't just pull a meaning out of thin air and make it work. You do have to, it does have to work within the text. And that's another kind of key there. And that's why it's so important to use the text around the words you don't know to figure it out. So we can come back and we can double check this. At the end of the day, Zonkinator asked his children about what they did at school. Zingstep talked about adding numbers in math, and Zipton bragged about scoring a goal while playing Calvin ball in PE. Hey, that makes sense. Now we understand what's going on. And as we create our vocabulary, the vocabulary builds on itself, right? We had to figure out what inductoplantar was before we could figure out what playing tots in math is, or even what playing Calvin ball and Glubberflobber. It all builds on itself as you work your way through what you read. But again, we didn't have to stop and go to a dictionary because these words aren't in the dictionary. I designed it that way on purpose. All right. The next lie tag, remember we figured out what lie tag means. The next day, Zonkinator's pancron didn't go off. That doesn't sound too good. Zonkinator skipped Mockplatz to make up time. This made Zonkinator hungry and still late for Tiedementum. This made Zonkinator's organoster angry. Alright, well we know lie tag is day, so the next day, right, we hit the end of the day, he asked his children about what they did in school. Well now we're at the next day and his pancron doesn't go off. How do we start our next day? Again, thinking about what we can do to make sense of this passage. There's something that can sort of start us on our day that can mess our day up if it doesn't happen, right? Because this kind of starts to think things aren't working very well. His alarm, right? We set an alarm to get up in the morning. So his alarm did not go off. Zonkenator's alarm didn't go off the next day. Zonkenator skipped Machplatz to make up time. Right? Because if your alarm doesn't go off, you're not running late. We know it's the beginning of the day. He skipped Machplatz. Think about that. You're running late, your alarm doesn't go off. What can you skip to try to make up time? Well, you can skip getting dressed, but I don't think that's going to work very well. Or we can skip breakfast. Especially noting that this made Zonkenator hungry. See here, as we keep reading, we get more information, we get more clues. Because he skipped Machplatz, he's hungry. Well, what's Machplatz? Breakfast. That's why he's hungry. He didn't eat breakfast. AST. All right, so Zonkenator's having a hard day here, isn't he? His alarm doesn't go off. He doesn't eat breakfast. He's hungry. And he's still late for tea to Minton. That's like quadruple whammy right there. Not only is it the alarm didn't go off, he skipped breakfast, he's hungry, and he's still late for tea to Minton. Well, where do we go generally where we got some? Okay, tea to Minton, we might have some ideas here. This made Zonkenator's organoster angry. Alright, so he's late for something, and as a result, somebody is angry at him for being late. Well, we know he's a parent, right, because he has 2 growths. Knowledge that we've built before. So there's a couple of guesses, right? He could be late for class. He could be late for any number of things. But we know he's an adult. We know he has children. That's going to lead us closer to tea to Minton is his job. Or we could even say work. Again, we're not looking for a super precise definition of the word. We're just looking for understanding the passage. So the next day, Zonkenator's alarm didn't go off. Zonkenator skipped skipped breakfast to make up time. This made Zonkenator hungry. Remember, that's how we know Machplatz is breakfast, because he's hungry, and still late for work, or his job. This made Zonkenator's organoster angry. Alright, who's angry at you when you're late for work? Your boss. So what we did here, number one, we didn't stop reading when we hit words we didn't know. Because if we'd have done that, we wouldn't have gotten past that very first word. Okay? We kept reading. We gathered clues. We made guesses. Sometimes that's part of it. Sometimes you've got to make a guess. But it's not just a guess that you pull out of the wild blue yonder. It's a guess based on knowledge you've got related to the text. It's always something very important. You always want to make sure you're related to the text. All right? We made some guesses. We confirmed our guesses by substituting what we thought the word meant and checking to see if it makes sense or not. As we built more knowledge within the story, we could then figure out other words that we didn't know. There were some words in here that we needed to unlock previous words before we could get the word we're looking at. Which again goes back to that importance of you need to sort of keep reading this to keep up with what's going on. Okay? Don't stop reading when you hit a word you don't know. It may prevent you from moving on. And again, the important piece here is understanding what's happening. The important piece here is we are looking at a day in the life of some person that has 2 children that are going to school, that he's late for work and his boss is mad at him. That's the important piece. That's what we need to be understanding, even more than what's the textbook definition of what an organoster is, or Machplatz. We need to be understanding the passage. That's ultimately what we're after here, is understanding the passage and what's going on. We substituted, we made guesses based on the text around it, and so actually we made educated guesses. We brought in background knowledge, right? What do we skip in the morning when we're late that makes us hungry? That's our own personal background knowledge that leads us to the guess that Montplatz is breakfast. These are just some of the clues that you're going to use when you come across these words that you don't know. So that's an introduction to this idea. Hopefully you followed along. Your next step is Words in Context Part 2. You're going to read a little bit more about Zonkenator and his next day. And some stuff happens. Zonkenator's got to figure some things out. There's going to be more words that you don't know. You may need to reference these words that we've already figured out. And again, the important piece is understanding. Can you make sense of what you read? Don't get wound up on whether or not you have a perfect textbook or dictionary definition. Worry about understanding what's happening. What's going down with Zonkenator? So that's your next piece. And again, you can find that worksheet in the link below. So you can download that however you want to get a look at it. If you want to, when you're done, you can just keep your answers on a sheet of paper, snap a picture of that paper, email it to me or whichever teacher you have an email for, so that we know that you've watched the video, done the worksheet, a little bit of extra practice for you. So, on that note, you got some extra practice to do at home. Good luck, and we'll talk to you next time. Bye. Bonus activity, because there's always something after the end of the credits, right? We're kind of like a superhero movie that way. Can you understand what this shirt says? All right. Unlike with the previous activity with the made-up words, these are all real words. They're just really big words. But this is actually a childhood saying. So if you can figure it out, again, write it down. Don't put it in the comments. Don't spoil it for others. Send it to me, and I'll tell you if you're right.